Welcome back to Soapbox Masons. In this episode, we're going to discuss the Commandery and Knights Templar within Masonry. Over the last year, and especially within the last few months, the Commandery has garnered a lot of attention from blogs, podcasts, and other articles, some positive, some negative. What is the role of the Commandery within Masonry? Is it relevant to Masonry? Tonight, we're joined by Right Worshipful Brother Robert Johnson, past master and current secretary of Waukegan Lodge number 78 under the Grand Lodge of Illinois, host of the Whence Came You podcast, co-host of the Masonic Roundtable, and managing editor of the Midnight Freemasons blog. We're also joined by Worshipful Brother Joe Martinez, current Worshipful Master of Manassas Lodge 182 in Manassas, Virginia, co-founder of Refracted Light, and organizer of the Esotericon. Next, we have Worshipful Brother Robert Marshall, past master and current secretary of Waco Lodge number 72 in Waco, Texas, chair of the Busy Brew Masonic Coffee, and host of the Historical Light Masonic podcast. And if you have not tried the coffee from Busy Brew, get online, order a bag. You will not be disappointed. And we also have Worshipful Brother Kevin Homan, past master of Olive Branch Lodge number 114 in the great state of Virginia, occasional guest on the Masonic Roundtable podcast, author of many articles on Freemasonry and other topics, and quite possibly has the best hair out of any of us here. And finally, we have Worshipful Brother Clint Green, past master of High Brighton Lodge 262 in Lenore, North Carolina, and senior deacon of Prometheus Lodge 775 in Newton, North Carolina. Clint is a phenomenal speaker and scholar, really focusing on the esoterics of Masonry. So, brothers, we are honored to welcome all of you here tonight and look forward to this timely discussion. All right, 3, 2, 1, here we go. Okay, so Kevin, you wrote an article just this past week, published an article about your thoughts on the Commandery and some of the things that you would see, some of your observations and feelings about that. And would you like to expand on that or maybe touch on your paper?
Yeah. I've actually written, I think, a series of articles recently on the Commandery, because that seems to be a topic that comes up quite a bit Masonically, right? No, this one was, I think, a response to the most recent Night Templar magazine came out, and really taking a look at what is proper talk Masonically when it comes to talking politics, right? Because we say we can't, we say we don't talk politics in the lodge room, but we seem to do also a poor job of doing it outside of the lodge room as well, which is, I guess, ironic, because it was with Joe and RJ 2 weeks ago talking about the same topic that and it makes me wonder, after that, like, is this a result of not having those conversations, right? Like, we just don't know how to do it. But yeah, I I guess had a nice response to the the most couple articles that were in the most recent Knight Templar magazine that I guess rubbed me the wrong way. Is that a good way to put it, Matt?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think most of us would put it that way. And it really brought into question, especially that particular magazine, that particular edition, that, what are the boundaries of the Commandery? We have a organization that is sworn to protect the Christian faith and uphold the Christian faith. But at the same time, Masonry regards no man for his race, religion, creed. We're all men of faith, but it doesn't mean we all necessarily worship in the same way or believe in the same deity. But there is in my opinion anyway, there is a Christ conscience that a lot of men have. And I do know of Masons in the Commandery who are not Christian, but they're in the Commandery, they're in the York Rite because they believe in the philosophy and ideology of Jesus or the teachings, but don't necessarily subscribe to the Christian religion. They just think, as in the Jewish or Islamic faith, where he is just a great prophet, and that's fine. But they have joined the Commandery because they believe in those values, they believe in those teachings without necessarily being Christian themselves. And now we're taking a turn where we want to kind of tell those guys they're not welcome here. And I just have a hard time swallowing that and feeling like that's Masonic. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to butt in again, Matt, but I guess to expound on that, what was it, last August? I think we had the triennial. Every 3 years, Grand Encampment gets together, elects new leadership, and all that. And part of that triennial was, there is already an attestation of being Christian within when you sign up to be a Knight Templar, but they wanted, somebody wanted to push new language on that and update it, and there was pushback on that because if you read it could be taken as excluding other forms of Christianity. It was written to a very, if you will, specific form of Christianity. Now look, if Templary wants to be Christian, I'm okay with that. I don't think it's the right decision. I think it should be more than that, but if that's what they want to do, that's all well and good. I guess trouble's a bad word. The thing I fight with Commandery is, you've set up this organization that claims to be a Christian Masonic organization. But then what do you do for me as the Christian Mason? How do you make me a better Mason and a better Christian? Because in my opinion, the organization doesn't do that. You get in, the orders are absolutely beautiful. The Order of the Temple is probably one of, if not the most beautiful of Masonic degrees or orders. And then you get in and they want me to learn how to do stuff with a sword and military drill. How does that make me a better Mason and Christian? Point blank.
Very well put. And Clint, that kind of brings up something you were discussing earlier, is the militaristic element of the Commandery and Knights Templar. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the militant Christianity is a phrase that is terrifying to 3/4 of the world's population. And I don't feel personally like Knights Templar should align themselves to be anywhere remotely close to that. We're not running crusades anymore. That should be all done and over with. The world has grown past that, and kind of idolizing that particular time period, it's not good for any organization, especially a Masonically affiliated organization, in my opinion.
Yeah, I see where you're coming. I mean, I think the idea behind the uniforms and the chapeaus and the swords and sword belts and the jewels, all that stuff, I mean, it's really pomp and circumstance. But I don't think it's meant to be taken literally as you are a warrior knight.
It's literally an innovation, Matt. I mean, the idea of like all the costumes and the drills, from what I have heard from lecturers on historical topics of like where swords and masonry came from, for instance, it's like the swords that we use within masonry even are just decorative pieces, not meant to do anything like fighting. They're just ceremonial. All of the outfits are literally what has been described to me as surplus after World War I. So all of the organizations have the exact same outfits, whether it was masonry or anything else, and they all had drill teams. It was really interesting that way. And then somehow this catches on, like maybe it's through nationalism or whatever. which I think grew out of America after going through the things that we went through, these growth periods of World War I, World War II. And before this, we had, of course, the flu pandemic and the Great Depression. Like, we got through it, and we back patted ourselves so much that, like, there's this idea of who can do it, we can do it, and we can do it. But it's not like this kind of nationalism just grows. And I think to a point when I say the word infect, but I do not mean that negatively. I just mean like injected and kind of propagates in the institutions that we have here, and Masonry being, the oldest fraternity, in the world, arguably, and in the Americas anyway. We're so traditional already. You've now added like a extra piece of tradition into what we do, and it kind of gets just propagated over time. But something else you said that was interesting was you talked about this idea of Christ consciousness and leaving out other elements of Christianity. And this leads into things like the spirituality movement that happens in the early 20th century, where we've got different groups that come out and they start thinking about things a little bit differently, like Gnosticism or even New Ageism, where we've got people who believe in multiple iterations of the Christ on earth, and Jesus is the last one that we had, and hence the greatest teacher that humanity has ever known. And so these are people who follow the teachings of Christ, but as you kind of pointed out, this idea of the Christ consciousness, the overarching idea of the Christ principle, is not a man. And sometimes this isn't necessarily addressed. And when it's not addressed, it leaves it open for interpretation. And that interpretation can be taken by somebody who knows about this stuff, and more than likely is not taken very well by people who don't understand what it is. And hence we don't talk about it much. And maybe even this idea is what caused this kind of knee-jerk reaction to acutely define exactly what brand of Christianity is acceptable for the Knight Templar organization. Just some thoughts.
I think they're excellent thoughts. Robert, I think you have some thoughts. I could kind of see that on your face.
Oh, that's just my face, Matt.
Oh, I'm very sorry.
I'd like to chime in on what RJ just said. Breaking it down to a specific type of Christianity is almost denominational, and it's biased towards certain denominations, much like what's the Catholic one? Knights of Columbus. Knights of Columbus is a fantastic organization, but you're not getting in there as a Southern Baptist. Likewise, if the Knights Templar in the United States does want to do an attestation of faith, it's going to limit out a lot of Christians that are good men, and that's what Masonry is about. It's good men, and we shouldn't leave anybody out like that.
But to be fair, a premise of the organization is to leave out everybody who is not of a particular religion, right? Or wrong?
Well, that's the thing, right? Like Masonry, the big question here that I think we are dancing around is this idea that can an organization still be Masonic if it is mutually exclusive to a single religion? Being that Masonry is supposed to be the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, period.
That's the giant feather-headed elephant in the room. I agree.
Yeah. So when we think about that, I mean, just off the beat, right? When we have posted things in various groups, there have been explosions. I've been accused recently of being divisive, right? And that's my fault. I didn't add context. And so that's my fault. And I totally apologize for that. And it really is my fault. I'm not being facetious or anything. So I should have added the context. And really, I was just reading the Rose Croix degree for this Ancient Except the Scottish Rite in the liturgies from Pike. That was like a republished from 1936. And in it, it comes across kind of anti-Catholic, and it comes across kind of deist. And actually, further down into the text, it says that any kind of masonry that is particular to a specific faith cannot be masonry. And then, to quote one of the people who commented on this when I posted it, they said, well, Knight Templary, Christian masonry exists. So you can't do anything about it now. Like, it's already there, it's done. And that's true. But it doesn't answer the question, right? Like, fundamentally, can such a group be Masonic? I think I have my answer to that, but it's such a weird question to ask because it can get, divisive.
It's I think you brought up something. If you notice in the Commandery, you really don't see any of the symbols of masonry. You don't see the square and compasses on their uniforms or anything like that. I mean, it's totally stripped and bereft of Masonic symbolism, and I think maybe that is for a reason. Maybe, and I'm just hypothesizing, maybe that was the way the Commandery was set up, just to distance itself from masonry. I could be really way off on that.
Well, I think that and it's amazing how quiet I've been this whole time. So I'm sure you're all shocked that I've not spoken. But I just want to touch on a couple of points, and we'll dovetail into that question of whether Masonic Templarism is really Masonic or not. But just to go back to what Clint said,
Real quick, Joe,
Yeah.
what's that apron behind you?
that is a right there. That is
That.
that's a Knight Templar apron from the turn of the century.
They have aprons?
They did.
But
And,
They're
yeah.
only just now allowed to wear those again, though,
You know?
right?
Yes, but we digress. Let's get back to the whole attestation of faith thing, right? Because that's the first demarcation of let's further filter this down from this group of people to now this group of people, right? Because there's really no other way to read that. So, to Clint's point, there's, almost 2 billion Christians in the world, of some flavor of Christianity or not, and within that big group, there's 45,000 denominations of Christianity. Now, I'm sure they're well represented across the world when it comes to Freemasonry, but how many of those would be excluded because they don't subscribe to this particular piece of dogma or this particular section within that attestation of faith? And I think the whole group decided that it was a bad idea for that very reason, right? Because it was going to further limit membership. And I can't for the life of me understand what the purpose of that was, but to touch on what RJ was talking about, yeah, a lot of these things were innovations, and we have to look at how Masonic Templarism started here in the United States. Robert brought up an excellent point when you have that golden age of fraternalism, right? Where veterans leaving the great world wars were joining things and joining en masse, right? They joined everything. They joined Blue Lodge, they joined the Kiwanis Club, they joined the Rotary. Everybody had fancy dinners. You did not see green beans anywhere in these buildings, or these dinners did not exist. You had foie gras and stuff like that. But a lot of these veterans,
That's a shame. That's a
yeah,
shame.
it is totally. But they did bring a lot of those military aspects, and one place where you could express that was in Masonic Templarism. You know what I mean? It really was. I can say this as a veteran. Do I love doing drill at Commandery? Absolutely not. If I wanted to do drill, I would have stayed another 15 years in the Army, but I didn't. Okay, because I don't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to do it when I was in there. So there are much more better ways to spend my time than to do drill and ceremony. But back to the initial question, can Masonic Templarism be Masonic if it excludes a particular sect? I'll give you an example, and then you can figure out the answer for yourself. We have a brother in my lodge who is Muslim, and he joined Masonry. Super cool dude. I'm not going to mention his name. Really, really young guy, and he's just so enthused about Freemasonry. And then we started to explain to him the York Rite. He's like, well, what's this about? And what's that about? And we started talking to him about the York Rite. And I heard a brother tell him, well, you can join the Royal Arch. And here in Virginia, we have Cryptic Council as well. It's all part of one big body. And then after that, you have Knights Templarism. But, and I quote, you have to swear to defend the Christian faith, to be a Knight Templar. And the Muslim brother, looked at this other brother and said, well, these are all brother Masons, so I would swear to defend anybody's faith, no matter what it was, because you're my brother and I love you. And my jaw dropped when I heard that answer. And I'm like, and this was around the time where that whole attestation of faith thing was going down, because somebody was going to chime in and say, well, you can't because you're not a Christian. And I if he had started saying that, I would have stopped him and probably thrown something at him. But that was the most awesome answer I have ever heard. And it was such a genuine Masonic answer that it really colored the rest of the conversations that we started to see on social media and by letters coming out from certain grand bodies about what things were going down. And it really put a bad taste in my mouth for the things that have been happening recently. So you can derive whatever answer you want from that, but it's the exclusionism, the forced exclusionism is definitely not Masonic, however you want to swing that. And like I said, you take that for what it's worth.
I have a question. I think maybe I would like to direct this at Robert, just because I know he's like a amazing historian. As far as I understand it, right? I was reading some text from Dan Gardner, Grand Secretary of Montana.
Montana.
Yeah. So Grand Secretary of Montana, prolific writer, wrote some great stuff, kind of unapologetic in his approach most of the time, because he's like, the history speaks for itself and here's the evidence. And from what we can kind of derive from a lot of this is that certain individuals who created the York Rite really stripped those from Scottish Rite degrees that existed previously. So the York Rite is the York Rite and the Scottish Rite is the Scottish Rite, but the York Rite is actually just ripped off ritual, and kind of presented a little bit different of a way, and to the individual candidate, maybe. There's some nuance there, and certainly I'm no expert. But speaking of this, the Knight Templar degrees are such and so similar. I mean, just look at the 32nd degree Knight Kadosh uniform, whether it's Southern jurisdiction or Northern jurisdiction, and they are unparalleled. In fact, you look at that old school pyramid diagram, and there they are, the KT and the Knight Kadosh, 32nd degree, same tier level.
30th degree, RJ.
It's the 30th. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
So what's interesting to me is, like, is the York Rite I don't know, like a Christian outgrowth? Like, hey, let's take these degrees of the Scottish Rite and let's boil it down and take the only Christian ones and throw them over here and kind of flavor them that way. And if that's the case, I mean, I don't know, but I'm just curious on your opinion, Robert. Like, what do you think happened there?
Per my opinion, hard to say on that specifically, because I haven't seen what you're talking about that Right Worshipful Gardner was commenting on or pointing to. Generally speaking, I can say there was a lot of back and forth between this, what I'll call the Scottish and York Rite traditions, where one was taking from the other and vice versa, much like you see with the moderns and ancients and craft masonry in the 1700s. So a lot of what we think of as York Rite came from Scottish and vice versa. And of course, as probably everyone here knows, and most people that'll take the time to watch this would know, there's a lot of French influence on those developments. And there is a recent book that I would recommend looking into that came out of the northern jurisdiction, I think. I can't remember which Grand Lodge houses the manuscript, but this translation is out digitally on Amazon right now. It's an early French with a little bit of German ritual. But if you read that one and you read what you can get on early Scottish Rite ritual, you're going to see things that are very, no, it wasn't Franken. You're going to see things that were very York Rite-ish and very not Catholic, but if you put yourself into the seat of the Catholic Church in the mid 1700s and imagine what it would feel like to find out that these Mason guys are doing this stuff that would look like a festive board to us with some extra elements of things like communion and certain elements of ritual and Christian illusions that would be, you just 100% take for granted if you did it now in the 21st century. But in the mid and late 1700s, it was pretty heavy stuff, and stuff that the church had up to that point had a very clear monopoly on, and a very violent monopoly on, right? If you tried to do anything resembling that stuff outside the control of the church at that time, it was a death sentence. So those elements of it, to me, get to something somebody else was saying on here earlier about why did this stuff sprout up in the first place, and when kind of can give us a clue, right? You get the Ramsey oration, only, I think, 2 years, not very long after the papal bull banning Freemasonry or condemning Freemasonry. And I don't know how accurate it is. I know it's been portrayed that Ramsey was a member of some kind of Templar-esque organization before he became a Freemason, and it had something called Order of the Temple in French that he may have introduced to Masonry. But this is all going on the backside of a branch or an authority within Christianity. In this case, it just happened to be the Catholic Church, but regardless, saying that we were doing things we shouldn't be doing. And if you read the papal bull, it meant including people of different religions, doing certain things that the church thought only it should be allowed to do. And I think a lot of what arose as Masonic Templary in the mid and late 1700s was a performative sort of, oh, we can do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it better than you do it. And as well as also kind of proving naysayers who were saying that we were an unchristian organization, or doing things that only a Christian organization should be allowed to do. Kind of a response to that, to prove that we were legitimate, and that we could do Christianity better than they could do Christianity. And I think it died down in some, at least that aspect of it died down some until in the early 1800s. With the Morgan affair, you get another religion-based, this time American fundamentalism, backlash against Masonry, accusing us of all kinds of things. And again, I think in response to that movement, you get a massive rise in, especially York Rite Masonic Templary, trying to demonstrate that we were good Christian American men and not this sinister thing we were being labeled as. I think that played a big role in the identity of American Masonic Templary, especially in the York Rite. And I think that if that is the case, then it begs the question, at what point should we stop trying to performatively prove something that we haven't really been under threat of for now over a century? Has that part of York Rite Templary's purpose died off long before we're still trying to answer it?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And then as you were talking about the history of it, of course, Pike was a York Rite Mason before he became a Scottish Rite Mason. Of course, before he, rewrote the degrees of Scottish Rite Masonry. So I think he did borrow heavily from the York Rite there. But we also have to look back at the formation of Masonry itself. before the appendant bodies. When you're talking about an organization, fraternity forming in Europe, what was the dominating driving force in most European countries at that time? And that would have been the church, whether it be the Catholic Church, Anglican Church. It was just a Christian-based dominance there as far as the religion goes. So it's really not a mystery. It's not a surprise that our degrees contain so much Christian symbolism. But if you really pay attention, you really look into it, it's not predominantly Christian. It is using that Christian symbolism that the men would have been familiar with to show a more, I guess, a deeper meaning, to really point out some valuable lessons there. Really, I hate to say the E word. I mean, even some esoteric stuff that's kind of buried in there, and you really have to read it, in the full context. There are brothers, and I know brothers that are fully convinced that Masonry is strictly a Christian organization, and that if you are not a fundamentalist Christian, you have no business being a Mason. That's something Clint and I were actually discussing last night, and that's been an unfortunate occurrence in some lodges. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, Robert, am I off with the history there, or do you think there's any kind of tie there?
No, that sounded on point as far as I know. And that's a good point. It was the common language in Europe at the time was Christianity. There's a way in which you can kind of think of it that way, that this was something that was so prevalent through all of our social and cultural experience that no matter what we tried to do, even if it wasn't a religious thing, it was going to come with a Christian flavor, because that had been such a defining element in the human experience for Western Europe for centuries at that time. So I think there is an element of truth to that. I also think there was a presence of non-Christians in the development of early Masonry. Right, we know for sure that there were some Jews in some early lodges. The influence of traveling rabbis in the late 1600s who were demonstrating physical models of King Solomon's temple in king's courts and different kind of public venues, and it was kind of like a trend or a fad at the time. This fascination with the temple and particulars about it. So there's that Jewish / non-Christian influence going on, and then also you've got the presence of Muslims in the coffee houses where so many Masonic lodges were meeting or hanging out. So while Christianity was kind of a language everyone and Christian symbols was a language that they were all comfortable and familiar with, there was also the presence of non-Christians there in early Masonry. So what does that say about a specifically Christian version of Masonry springing forth? I don't know.
I would take that a step further and say that, as shocking as it sounds, Freemasonry does change over time for the people that are its members, right? Freemasonry today does not look like it did in the mid 1700s. It just doesn't, right? So, and we know through people who wrote and people who gave speeches and things like that. We talked about Ramsey as well, but let's look all the way back to Desaguliers and Anderson. Their first writings were very laden in Christianity because, as Robert said, that was the language of the time. Even if that wasn't their intent, that's how information got communicated. But, and let's stay in England for a minute, there was a self-correction after a few decades. There, especially when the Grand Lodge split into two, there was a self-correction where some people did take a lot of these overtly Christian elements out of the ritual, and by the time of the reunification, you did get a more universal flavor of Freemasonry than you started with. So yeah, it took a century, but and I will say that Freemasonry is slow to change, no matter what country you're in. But it did self-correct, and it did speak to a much more universal audience than it did, when speculative Freemasonry was formed as we know it. So I think it does self-correct. I think we're in one of those periods of self-correction right now, because you don't have this, people shouting from the rooftops that yes, everything, all of Masonry needs to be overtly Christian, and doubly so for Masonic Templarism, and we only want this flavor of Christian. There are people raging against that, and so I think we're in one of those periods of self-correction. Is it going to happen tomorrow? No, because the train just does not move that fast in Masonry land. But will it happen? Yeah, I think so, and but I always hold to the ideal that Freemasonry is what it needs to be for the people that are currently its members. And I think as a result of that, it will change, and it will morph into, I think, what its members are looking for, or it will just succumb to the decrease in numbers that it's continuing to do. We're at what, less than 1 million, under 900,000 now. I don't even know what the MSANA is reporting now. So, if we keep doing what we're doing, we'll just continue to lose members. So off my soapbox.
So in other words, I mean, if we remain exclusionary and certain orders within Masonry, certain bodies within Masonry, I'll even dare say it, even certain lodges within Masonry, we are actually just hurting ourselves. We're just driving down our numbers. We're just hastening our demise, really, as a fraternity.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it goes back to, what I mentioned earlier is what do you have to offer me?
Yeah, and if we're being realistic, and obviously we need to be because of the kind of numbers issues y'all are talking about here. I want to say it was 2012. I don't remember the exact year, but sometime in the last decade or so, the studies started coming out, the polls started coming out to show that for the first time in American history, a majority of the adult population no longer identifies specifically as Christian or any particular denomination they're in. That just is, right? There's, stepping aside from wanting to talk about whether that's good or bad or what it means for the soul of the country or a lot of the kind of conversations that came out of that, just on the face of it, that's reality. That's the statistics. So with that being the case, and the trend being that the number of people who identify as Christian or a particular denomination they're in is declining, it, as Kevin just said, it's self-defeating to insist on including only people of a declining population. There's the result of doing that is obvious. If there's fewer and fewer of a certain kind of people, and you insist on only letting that kind of person into your organization, you're going to disappear.
Well, they're guarding the West Gate, Robert. Come on now.
Well, I'll ask a tough question. Do we need Masonic Templarism?
Yeah, that's kind of how, from a historic perspective, I feel like that's a question that is asked by the fact that it arose and grew in two particular eras in response to Freemasonry being persecuted as not being Christian enough or not being correctly Christian. That's obviously no longer an issue. So Masonic Templary is not going to answer that question anymore. That's not a question. So what question is it answering?
And that's, Robert, I love that. I love that because it's like, when I kind of look at Masonic Templarism, what I see is like, and it seems to fit in with that theory, right? Because it's like, okay, we're going to have this Christian Masonic organization, but then that's like all anybody did, right? It's just like, we're going to have a Christian Masonic organization, but beyond that, like there's no forethought into how that's going to benefit its members and what it's going to do. We're just
Yeah.
going to wear military uniforms and do drill. Or in the case of Joe's Commandery, cap and mantle. But
Cap
gotta
and
give-
mantle, baby.
Got to give respect to the cap and mantle.
You know,
So,
I
yes.
can tell you, I saw in my commandery when I was still a member there that there were benefits, that some of the guys who were hanging out there all the time were Vietnam veterans who had never talked to anybody about some stuff they really needed to talk about, and commandery was where they were doing it. Unfortunately for me, that made me feel like I wasn't in a place I should be. I'm not a veteran, so as weird as it sounds, being a part of commandery to me felt weirdly similar to stolen valor. I felt like I was guilty of stolen valor just by being a member of commandery. And so for that and other reasons, I kind of steadily backpedaled my way out of that and focused on other parts of masonry. I can tell you that here in Central Texas, that veterans club aspect of it is a big part of commandery. So maybe that's the question being answered: where can veterans all hang out together and be brothers? But getting back to Kevin's question, is that something that society needs? I mean, would the VFW or another organization not be able to fill that niche? I know that there are some very active KT guys who I've got a ton of respect for, and I recently had a conversation with a couple of them on this kind of stuff, and it was interesting to see their perspective on whether or not it's Masonic for there to be a Christian only organization. Obviously they both believed it's not unmasonic. That's why they're still part of it and very active in it. But one of them strongly wanted to push his response to any of that kind of question of, well, then there should, I'm perfectly okay with there being a Jewish Masonic organization and a Muslim Masonic organization or any other religion. I'm a part of a Christian one because I'm Christian, but I think there should be parallel options for all the other organizations or all the other religious beliefs. But I don't know. That still kind of, to me, feels like we're just unnecessarily splintering off after coming into something where we were told this organization is not going to differentiate you based on what you do or don't believe religiously or what kind of group that you fit into. So it's almost like a bait and switch kind of thing, especially if you're in a jurisdiction where say it wasn't commandery, say there's a Jewish one like Judas Maccabeus, I think. Say it was that, or say there was actually I can tell you, looking at early Shriner ritual and Albert Rawson and what that stuff, it was a very Muslim, very serious Arabic culture group in the late 1800s. And it moved away from that in the mid 1900s to kind of become a more laid back, fun thing. But say it was a version of the shrine that is specifically Muslim. If you don't profess faith in the teachings of Muhammad and so on and so forth, and you can't join. And you found out as a non-member of the shrine that the only way that you could become DDGM or a DGM or ADGM, whatever your jurisdiction has, a lead officer in your area, was if you did join this Muslim only organization. That's kind of weird. If our initial organization claims to not have any favor given to your religious viewpoints, it's nobody would be surprised by the statement that there are jurisdictions where your participation in commandery impacts your path in Blue Lodge.
Yep.
Well,
That's
Robert,
it's strange.
I want to ask a really difficult question on that. How many states in this country would literally go apoplectic if there was a, let's say, all Muslim Masonic organization that started to form?
Yeah.
At least 50.
And I say that because I can say in my lodge, we raised a brother several years ago. I think it was 2 or 3, who he moved here from another jurisdiction. He, yes, my daughter's back here. So everybody say hi to Whitney.
Hi, Whitney.
Hey, Whitney.
Moved here from another jurisdiction where he had petitioned to become a Freemason. And he was blackballed because he's a Buddhist.
Oh wow, yeah.
So yeah, like
The-
I hate
whole
that I
ti-
have to even ask that question. Sorry, Joe, I didn't mean to cut you off. I hate that I have to
No.
ask that question, but I mean,
No, it's as Robert was speaking, all I was thinking about were the jurisdictions where, number one, all of your York Right degrees are on a single petition. I'm not a member of a jurisdiction that does that. I know there are those that exist, but so you've got a bunch of guys that are going through the York Right degrees together, and I know there's jurisdictions where one night is York Right night, right? They have chapter, then council, then commandery meeting. So if you've got 10 guys and two, you have 8 Christians, 1 Muslim, and 1 Jewish brother. What do they all kneel at the altar for chapter and council? But then when they're about to open commandery, they say, "Oh, you two got to wait outside." Sorry. I mean, that just reeks of not the whole brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God kind of thing. It's just weird and creepy to me. But that's me.
When you guys started talking about this, and you mentioned the splintering of we'll just call it the original institution of Freemasonry. Like, while the original Knight Templar organization may have been started to preserve and bring the majority religion, like a spiritual belief, into Freemasonry, like to kind of coalesce, and maybe that makes it feel better or something. But without a doubt, I've heard men in my local area say there's just something special about, or it's a special place to hold fellowship with Christians, and like it's somehow better than lodge. And I don't really have I don't have a great way to say this. I'll just say it. So does Knight Templarism exist now just due to the preservation of history and not wanting to let it go because it's a rich history and all of these things? And if so, or is it equally something else, like a safe space for largely what can be described as Christian nationalism within Freemasonry?
but what's special about it?
Well, just that you're a Christian, and I feel safer around you because I don't have to sit in a lodge or worry about, making off-color comments about other religions or races other than Christianity.
That never happens.
Yeah.
Ever.
Or
Ever.
or progressive ideas, right? I mean,
Yeah. Goes right back to
You-
brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God.
Kevin, you mentioned in your article your rubbed you the wrong way or whatever, and 2 terms that you talked about in your article is cancel culture and wokeism, and that is very interesting. And I think in a lot of places, all over the world, it's used as the derogatory terms to refer to some sort of progressiveness that is not necessarily agreed upon by some public or political party. So
I think it's just a crutch for an argument when you don't have the winning argument.
okay. So, but like,
Maybe in this case.
what is the purpose, right? Like, I just asked, is it just like a safe place so you don't have to worry about stuff? Is it tradition? Is it both? Is it a control mechanism, right? I mean, all of the highest echelons within Freemasonry, like those bits of Freemasonry that are super exclusive, around here they are anyway. Red Cross Constantine, all of these other things are Christian only, to like, that's it. You must be a Trinitarian to be considered. And you have nothing but past grands in these things. So I don't know. It just feels weird. Like you can ask that same question again. You know, what happens if you start a Norse rite of Freemasonry, or a Buddhist rite of Freemasonry or something? It's what's the other side going to say? What is the justification for the existence of a Christian only order that's okay but not regular if it's something else? I wonder, but it's not been tested to my knowledge.
No, but I
Right.
think it. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Uh,
Or
I think,
Robert.
yeah. So, two things on there on what you just said there. One being that I did talk to that extremely active commandery guy who said that, he thinks there should be a Jewish Masonic one and a Muslim Masonic and so on and so forth. So that would be one of the responses to part of what you said there, RJ, is that there should be all of those too, that it shouldn't just be Christian. I don't know that that's what all commandery guys would say, but that's what one in particular said.
Can I cut in here though, Robert? Because I want to go back to my previous statement and say, are there enough Buddhist and Muslim Masons to form a group like that? And if
Agreed.
not, why are there not enough members to do so?
Agreed.
Sorry
I'm with you. But I think so this also I think hits on that and RJ's last question, or point about whether it has even been attempted or not. And I want to get back to something I kind of just threw away as I mentioned it. The shrine in the late 1800s was a serious esoteric Islam and Arabic culture based experience. I've got records going back to the late 1800s and from the early 1900s where these guys are exchanging letters. They're not goofing around talking about Allah and Muhammad and Ramadan and so on and so forth. They're seriously treating this stuff. I can't say that any of them converted to Islam, but I can say confidently that they were very seriously engaging Islam, and they were doing it through their experience as Shriners. And then, and again, I've got the records for this. In the 40s, 50s, and 60s, letters started being passed around the country. You had two factions that developed in American Shriners in the mid 1900s. One were the old guys, one were the younger guys. Shocker there. The younger guys were wanting to take Shriners in a direction that was more fun, charity, less ritual, less serious, contemplation based. And the old guys were saying, please, please don't throw away our precious Shriner, our precious shrines. This is serious stuff. It's not just a social group. And I mean, that's the way these letters read. And they did throw it away. And circling back to where you were at with it, RJ, and Kevin, on whether or not there are enough of any of these other minority groups to have these kinds of organizations. I suspect the reason that the shrine moved away from having serious contemplation of Islam or Arabic culture was Islamophobia, which is to say that it was okay for us to play Muslim until Islam was scary on an external, non-Masonic, just general society level, and then they were quick to turn it into something else. And I think that's another problem of not just do we have, are there enough Buddhist Masons to start a Buddhist Masonic group that could be taken seriously as a parallel to, say, Commandery, but also could it be sustained and not turned into something else entirely? And that's what I would argue happened to the shrine.
I'd like to jump in here back to something Kevin and RJ were saying. You brought up, and of course, Kevin, you had brought up the idea of cancel culture or canceled culture, and woke or wokeness. And one of the things we need to look at is when we start talking about the cancel culture and wokeness and things like that, those in and of themselves are also exclusionary. I don't like what you're saying. I don't like what you're putting out there. So therefore I'm canceling you. And in some ways, aren't we doing that in not only, the York Rider Commandery, but also in some lodges where we're saying, you don't conform to what we think you should conform to. So therefore you have no business being here. And that bothers me, because that in most of our jurisdictions, in our entered apprentice degrees, in our lectures, one of the very first principles we're taught about Masonry is that Masonry regards no man for the color of his skin, for his creed, for his religion, from the highest of the highs to the lowest of the lows. All men are equal. We are all on the same level. But then you have any kind of exclusionary body that says, yeah, we're all on the same level, but we're just on a different level than you. And that's kind of the way it comes across to a lot of people. And I think it's discouraging and frankly probably insulting to a lot of good men.
I think it's a fine line, Matt, right? Like, let's use the example of traditional observance lodges, right? Like, they typically have I don't want to say higher bar of entry, but they like to view things as traditional Masonically, right? I don't have a problem with traditional observance lodges, but I think to your point, you have to toe a very fine line. You really need to determine, like, all right, are we bringing a guy in? Is he going to fit in with our, not only do you have to determine, does this man fit in with our lodge and what we're trying to do as a TO organization? And it's okay if they don't, right? Like, I don't think there's a problem if somebody doesn't fit in with TO, for example. But if they don't, I think you also have to ask yourself the question, but would this man make a good Mason? And if you can answer that question as yes, then you need to do what you can to help him find a Masonic lodge. Because you can do, this is Masonically as a whole, you can do a vast disservice to Masonry if you don't do that and just say, well, we're TO, he's not good enough for our lodge, so we're just not going to help him find another Masonic lodge. It's just, he's not good enough for Masonry as a whole. But yeah, I think it's a tough question. And I guess I realize that's not really on the topic of what we're talking about here in Templarism, but
let's make this a conversation about Masonic Templarism. So say we have this really amazing brother who is super spiritually profound and has enjoyed himself journeying up the York Rite ladder of Freemasonry, and then he's Muslim and he says, hey, I want to be a Knights Templar. Using that same question that you asked about TO lodges, how do we answer that question for that young brother?
I don't think you can answer it the same way. As it is set up right now, I don't think you can answer it the same way, which is a shame, because if you read in Smoley's Hidden Wisdom, when he talks about Sufism, you don't necessarily have to be Muslim to learn the teachings of Sufism. So let's apply this to Masonry. Why do you have to be a Christian to learn, become a Knight Templar? Same thing for the Kabbalah. You don't necessarily have to be Jewish to learn about the Kabbalah. So why do we have to be Christian to be a Knight Templar?
Because you have to be ready to serve in the Holy War.
What Holy War,
RJ? The one that they think is coming.
What? That gets back to the militant.
That sounds ridiculous.
Okay.
But
So let's not get off into the ancient aliens.
I know, Robert. I know.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Yeah. That's gonna, if you're listening out there and that sounded like a joke to you, it was, but also you should know that there are a lot of guys within Masonry and within Commandery that do not think that's a joke.
Yep. I want to chime in real quick if I can. kind of a reply to Matt. I think Joe touched on it. RJ, Robert, everybody. Then, um,
What? What do you want to
I've been
say?
quiet for a while. So,
Welcome to the club, Clint.
um, we throw around the T word, as we call it, tradition. There's another T word that's more human nature aspect. I'm getting into the psychology side of Clint right now, but tribalism is kind of a human nature, and I think Robert touched on it with fear of Islam led to certain activities and groups being formed. Humans cannot survive in this world without other people. We are social creatures, and part of that whole aspect is masonry is meant to be universality in masonry. The issue comes about with tribalism in that people are afraid of universality without being consciously aware of it. It's coming out of your comfort zone. The things that we teach, learning to master certain aspects of ourselves, it's scary stuff, and it's meant to be scary stuff. And as soon as humans are afraid, the first thing they do is they find other people that are afraid, form echo chambers, and build themselves up into groups. This is not a direct comment on any Masonic body whatsoever, but a lot of organizations in the world are started, formed, thrive, and then turn into something completely different because of the tribalism that humans tend to adhere to for their own protection.
So, Clint, based on that, I mean, that's a brilliant way of putting that. And you see that in any organization, not whether it's, I mean, it can be within a church, it can be within, a Boy Scout troop, it can be within Masonry, it can be anywhere. We've all seen lodges where there's this mentality and culture because they are men that came together, and like you said, it becomes an echo chamber to where everyone is, in lockstep on these same beliefs. And as soon as something threatens that belief, suddenly, we can't accept that. That can't be a part of who we are. And we can't allow ourselves to devolve into that. And a lot of organizations have done that. That's one of the things that worries me about the Commandery. And I say it because I love the Commandery. I love the York Rite. And so I say this out of fear for where some of this is going, is that we take some of this extremism, we take some of this exclusionary ideology, and where does that end up? Because at what point does your ideology not then conform with the next group of guys? And how soon is it before you find yourself kicked out to the curb? It's just a very slippery slope.
Yeah, that's what Robert was saying about the Sean. It started out a solid, full, meaningful organization, and I'm a member of the Sean. I'll gladly, admit that it's a great organization. Love the hospitals. We have a lot of fun and not a lot of teaching, and that's what it's turned into. But because of what Matt just said, the next group of guys come in, and things change. As slow as it may be, Joe, with the Masonic train moving so slow, things do change. And
that's a good point. And someone in this conversation earlier said Masonry more or less kind of becomes what people / society needs Masonry to be at that time. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. But that being the case, for our subject matter, Masonic Templar Commandery, it's dwindling, and not just dwindling at an alarming rate, even compared to the rest of Masonry, but also the infighting and some of the nastiness that's happened in recent years are all indicative of, if it's true that Masonry and its Masonry subparts become what society and what Masons need it to be, Templar is obviously searching for what that means for Masonic Templary right now, and it either hasn't become that thing, or there haven't been enough guys who have figured it out that it is what they need yet. So it's going to have to change somehow to grow again, or become less divisive, like compared to less divisive than some of the lines that have been drawn in the sand recently on what kind of Christian you have to be, or that kind of stuff. But really, again, when you boil down to it, if we zoom out, and it's so hard to do as active Masons, because as active Masons we get caught up in Masonry quite a bit. But if we can think as a non-Mason for a second, the discrepancy, the apparent contradiction of, oh, I'm a Mason and anyone of any kind of faith can be a Mason. We don't discriminate based on religion. Oh, no, you can only go to this meeting if you're a Christian. That's weird. How do you justify that to a non-Mason? I don't see it. And so again, the Commandery guys that I talked to before this conversation, who I love to death, I would die for those guys. They're adamant that essential aspect of Commandery isn't unmasonic. Now, the word unmasonic comes with kind of an almost legal vibe for a lot of Masons. So if we can not use that and think more, is it non-Masonic, or is it other than Masonic? I don't know how you can say otherwise. It's very clearly defined on a principle that is different than one of Freemasonry's most essential principles. How can we don't discriminate based on religion coexist with you're only allowed in here if you're of this religion?
I think one thing that would help is have all the books on all the altars all the time, and just everyone would know right then and there that the issues may sort themselves out at that point.
I think that's true, and I agree with you. And I also think that I have visited commanderies where if I put any other kind of book on that altar, the swords actually would have come out.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've been to a few lodges and brought my own copies, and it was bad.
Well, let's play devil's advocate here for a second and get out of the. It sounds really bad when I say it this way, but let's get out of the provincial mindset of American Freemasonry for a second. Let's for example, let's go to Sweden, right? Just to become a Freemason in Sweden, you have to be a Trinitarian Christian, right?
Yep.
So take all this commandery stuff and throw it out the window. You can't even be a Blue Lodge Mason because Freemasonry in Sweden is wholly a Christian organization, right? And I'm sure there are other places that have restrictions based on religion and stuff. So again, I'm just bringing this up for devil's advocate purposes, but this heated debate is entrenched in American continental Freemasonry and what Templarism has become here in the early 20th and continuing into the 21st century. So I know it's weird when I argue somebody else's opinion, but I felt like I should bring it up.
Well, this shouldn't be an echo chamber either, of our own making, but I'd also argue there's more substance in the Swedish Rite than there is currently in Masonic Templarism.
Oh,
sorry. I love my Swedish bros.
It's funny, if you look back at the actual Knights Templar, not the Masonic Knights Templar, but the Knights Templar of the 12th century.
Baphomet.
Yeah, they actually admitted men of different faiths into the Templary. Most notably Gnostic Christians like the Bogomils, the Cathars. They welcomed them in.
Blasphemy.
I know.
Yeah,
so
that is blasphemy.
If it's good enough for them, I'm just saying.
But we're not a direct descendant of them, so we don't have to follow those ideas.
No, we're not.
You just broke a lot of people's hearts, Joe.
I know. What's Dan Brown going to do now, Joe? You just ruined it for him.
He's doing a fair bit of that.
He's not going to get a second season of his show, so that's okay.
Boo.
All right. Well, we've been going at it about an hour. I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I'd love to go around and just get some closing thoughts from everyone. No particular order, just jump right in.
This was good, Matt. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having everybody. I, you know, I'm a Templar. I call myself a proud Templar, but it's, you know, I have found myself questioning my membership in the organization over the last year or so for many reasons, right? I think one, which I initially brought up, discussing what does it do for me as a Mason and a Templar or and a Christian? How does it make me better in each of those? And of course, the recent Knight Templar magazine. It's tough, and I'll say I got some feedback from brother Masons to my article who said similar things. One who I think was a member for 3 years and then left because they weren't getting anything out of the organization. And it's a shame because the Knights Templar has beautiful degrees or orders, which we call it in Templarism, and it's a shame because you get through those orders, you go through the high point of the Order of the Temple, and then by and large, it just doesn't meet the hype, and it's a shame. It's a true shame. To answer the question of is restricting it to Christians only Masonic or unmasonic? I don't know if it's unmasonic. One, I don't think it does the organization any favors. But yeah, I think we've made some good points that it should be reconsidered. I don't know where the organization goes from there, but I think we've made some good points that it's not necessarily the right way forward for the organization as a whole.
Yeah, I'd generally say I agree with everything Kevin's saying here. I'd say in closing, I would balance some of what I've said in this session by saying that I also believe the Order of the Temple and all of the York Rite journey, for me, the degrees and orders were absolutely amazing. It was beautiful ritual. I wish everyone could see it. It very impactful, and I love that I experienced it. Personally, I think I've come to the conclusion that I think that the rule that you have to be Christian to be in the commandery, which I understand not all commanderies have, but that rule I think is outdated. It needs to go away. And there was an allusion here tonight to the original Templars admitting people of other religions. It's been a while since I have reviewed any study on them, but I seem to recall that specifically they were admitting Muslims and people who that historically they're often thought of as being the sworn enemies of, and that actually was one of the reasons they came under the target by the Catholic Church. Accusing them of having adopted Muslim or Arabic culture practices that were deemed unchristian to some degree or in some way, so it is odd that this organization is based on an organization that itself was not as exclusive as we're insisting on this one being. I think it would do a lot of good for Commandery if the rules against Christians or the rules against non-Christians getting in went away. And as Kevin said, I don't know necessarily what that would mean or look like for the organization moving forward, but I do think it would be better than what they have now.
I would I'm going to be much shorter than these guys because they said all the good important things, but I will say this, that one of the things that attracted me to Freemasonry so many years ago was the fact that it really focused on the commonalities that we have with other members of our human species, right? The things that make us the same, not the things that divide and keep us separated. And I'll also say, I love being a Christian. I love Christianity. It is where I found my home spiritually. But even as a Christian, I still feel weird when I exclude other brothers of different faiths, because I truly believe that, as RJ said all the way at the beginning, we are a brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God. And to have any sort of exclusivity based on one of those founding tenets of Freemasonry, or what Freemasonry is today, just it's weird for me. So yeah, I'm interested to see where Masonic Templarism goes in the next few years. That'll definitely determine my place in it. And yeah, so y'all got some work to do. So get her done.
Yeah, I'm
Would
gonna.
just oh, go ahead, Clint.
Oh, thank you. I'm just gonna basically agree with everyone that's gone before me, and I'm gonna go ahead and assume I agree with RJ here. Yeah, I love my brothers, my companions, my comrades, my cousins, all throughout Knights Templar. And I'm not ready to give up on it yet, at all. But we got a lot of work to do. We need to do better to be better, and this is one of those pivotal times in history. And I'm with Joe. We're gonna wait and see how things go. But I have faith. I do. This will all turn out all right.
I would just say that again, I agree with most of what you all have had to say. I do think, however, I don't think it's unmasonic to have a specific theme for a set of degrees or rights. I think Christianity in and of itself has so much to unpack, whether that's analogy, or you think of it as historical fact, or whatever the case is, and not to mention the esoteric mysticism that exists with the faith. It's just pretty amazing. So to have a series of degrees based on the history and perhaps what Knight Templar had at their disposal, and the things that they were studying with their contemporaries in the Islamic world and the Middle East, I think is pretty rad. But to add verbiage to exclude anyone from joining and learning of the history and the esoteric spiritual teachings contained within that order, just might be really detrimental. I just think that if we've got missionaries going all over the world trying to spread the good news, okay, so if that's the case, then the exclusionary nature of a Templar Christian only order isn't doing anybody any favors in terms of trying to convince anybody to join. What if what if a deist like myself, I am a dues paying Knight Templar member in the state of Illinois. Our buddy Scott Sherman, he is Jewish and he is a member in Massachusetts. So there are brothers of many different faiths who have joined under the same thing that Brother Joe Martinez said, that his young candidate had disclosed as well, which was that he would always swear to uphold the beliefs of a brother, regardless of your individual particular belief. So under that same way, I think that's what Scott did. That's what I did. I believe wholeheartedly in my Christian brothers' need for Christian fellowship and a Masonic order that teaches this stuff. But I think narrowing it down to such an acute definition, in particular, this one that just came out, was just egregious. It negated so many Christians out there. But anyway, what if we opened it up? I think Kevin Homan said in one of his earlier articles that what if Templary turned or added a research component to it and opened it up to any, faith. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea. It opens it up, and if somebody, a deist or somebody who joins, all of a sudden goes, oh my God, I had this epiphany. I am going to start going to church. I'm converting, right? Like, what if that happened? I mean, that can't happen if you're Christian only. And what a safe place to be to if you were going to convert, right? Like, what a safe place to go and talk about Christianity if that's truly what happened at our Bethels around the country. I don't know. I feel like I will say exactly what Robert Marshall said, right? It's probably time to move on.
And I think that was very well said. And I'll just close it out by saying that I do agree with pretty much everything these distinguished brothers have had to say tonight. One of my concerns is that if we let our vigilance down, if we let some with more extreme ideologies take hold, whether it be in the Commandery, whether it be in any other organization, it runs the danger of changing that organization and even tearing down that organization. And I think we have to be vigilant of that. I have had some concerns over the last year with where the Commandery is going. And leading up to this, over the last week, I've spoken with a number of Knight Templar Masons from around the country. And I have found very few that actually subscribe to a very rigid fundamentalist ideology, such as what just came down last week and fortunately was defeated. But that's not the majority of Masons' opinions. That's a small group, but they are a loud group. And it's up to us and those of us that are in the York Rite and Knight Masons and Knights Templar to just be vigilant of that, make sure that we don't let things go off the rails and that we don't let someone turn their ideology into something that ultimately harms and discriminates and pushes out good brothers who have every right to be in that organization with you. So with that, I appreciate all the panelists being here tonight. I appreciate the conversation. I think this is a very deep conversation. I think this conversation needed to be had. It's long past due, probably. And I don't know if it's going to change anything. I don't know if we're going to change the world by doing this, but I hopefully we've given the viewers something to contemplate, something to think about, and maybe even discuss within their own commanderies. So with that, I appreciate everyone watching, and everyone.
Call to conclave. Call to conclave.
Yes, there you go. Sounds good to me.
Don't be too disloyal.
Woo!
All right. Well, good night, everyone.